subject to the Newton's laws. He created Newton's laws. He's not subject to entropy. He created entropy.
I think I'm just going based off the analogy and taking it even further about a chess game and that stuff, is in taking the perspective of rules in themselves. So, like, we create these games. Just think of a board game. We're playing chess and that stuff. Well, I created those rules. I don't have to operate them. Like, I don't have to move like a knight where I go one up and one to the side.
Yeah.
Like, we don't operate in that way. We only physically move the pieces within it. And that's it. In some ways, I think a good pairing of the existence and showing the character of God is in saying, all right, we have to operate under His rules, but He is not a part of those rules. He is separate from that himself because He created it.
Exactly.
So then you have to prove to me, in a sense, that God is, bounded by rules in itself. Like, and you're restricting God in itself, anyways, which is awkward.
Yeah.
To be honest, like that's an awkward thing to say and presume, because then you're saying, okay, God, God created this, and He created all these laws, but He's restricted Himself by these laws, which seems like a thing that you're circulating. It's like, no, that's not exactly answering anything. That's actually presuming that the laws that He created Himself, He has to govern by, which I don't think that's quite true. So,
no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you might as well, as a scientist, you're kind of like, you're like Bobby Fischer, right? And saying that basically you, how would I say it? You are the master of chess. And in a lot of ways, it's like, yeah, maybe. If you're Bobby Fischer, God is the game company. I don't know who invented chess, but they're the creator. You're just operating expertly within a system that you yourself have to take for granted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, going back to more questions, and it's great that how you described all this idea and that stuff. And just reflection on yourself, on how you came up with this conclusion. What steps did you take to get here on this answer?
Sure. This isn't new information by any means. I think this has been generally understood for a long period of time within the church, but I think it's easy to forget, like I say, because I think sunrise, sunset, most days, the natural laws are everything that you operate under. There's nothing, I mean, I know prayer would be something, for example, or anytime you exist in the spiritual, there's something supernatural, I would say, that's happening all the time. But you're not typically cognizant of it. It's just kind of a continual drudgery of everyday life. Almost makes you're so comfortable with these same rules day in, day out, that I think we forget how important it is, or sometimes we even forget that there is another side of things that's existing. And so we fall into the trap of basically trying to give an explanation for where God came from. We're convinced by our own day in, day out, just life, daily life, that the naturalistic world is all that there is, that when we get approached with one of these questions, it can kind of slip us up for a minute. But I think this is nothing new. I'm actually kind of surprised that in atheism, for example, which would be the worldview that would pose this most, that people don't argue more about matter itself not being created, or the universe itself having existed eternally. It seems actually like a more logical way to say things than looking at the origins. I know that the universe is expanding, and I think based off of that observation, they've rewinded it back, and that's why they think it would have first exploded out. And so they kind of got stuck in this corner of, it looks like things came out of one point. It seems like things are generally expanding off of a single point. And it's really put them in a hard situation to now say that there's a start point. And if there's a start point, then how did it start?
Right. And then I think it's also interesting when you bring up the fact that it's expanding, and we can go back to a start point. And people are like, aha, so there is something that is like, there's a start timer for everything. there's nothing before. And so then they're like, oh, then that means there is no God because there's a start time, which, like you said, that's a creation, that's a presupposition that everything is revolved around time.
Yeah.
Which it's not.
No.
Which you made a presupposition that God is, that he created time and he is ruled by time, which, like I said, gets into an awkward conversation about the constraints on God himself.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is the actual, unless you have the ultimate burden of proof to show that God is constrained by the things that he makes.
Yeah.
I don't think it holds water very easily.
And you brought up a good word right there, the burden of proof.
Right.
I think what's become one of my favorite things that I think an atheist will say is like the flying spaghetti monster argument, which is the, just because, I don't understand something, therefore I postulate something ridiculous.
Right.
But what's so interesting is I'm tired of ceding this ground. This is one reason I love that this channel is called The High Ground. We need to take back that high ground because in actuality, the burden of proof lies on both us and atheists.
Right.
And I've talked before about this where I think it's not, atheists like to argue that our default is to be an atheist. Like we're all born atheists, right? That's kind of what they'll say. That's not true. We're all born agnostic, I would say. We're all born not knowing. We just don't understand.
Right.
And just like you have to take some steps. Like you can't remain that way forever
Right.
because you need a way to understand and interpret the world. And there are certain systems that work within themselves. And they've all kind of got these things that you have to make leaps on or logical leaps, or there are problems that maybe would be holes in it, and you hopefully, ideally, you throw that one out.
Mm-hmm.
But whereas Christianity, you take logical steps, I think in atheism you have some holes.
Right.
And so either way, you have to be trained into it. So the burden of proof does, in some ways, lie on me to say that there is God. I would say certainly it's obvious that atheism is wrong because things exist. It's an incredibly easy argument. Not only that, they're under a huge burden to prove that nothing supernatural has ever happened since. Mm-hmm. Not that most things that are supernatural are wrong. Not that 99% are wrong, but that nothing
Right.
has ever happened.
Not a single one.
That would defy the natural laws. And then, whereas a Christian's not under that burden in any situation. It's actually cohesive in my understanding from start to finish. Maybe atheism has a chance to fill those gaps in.
Right.
I think this is why atheists are so. It can be they get very offended by even the concept of something maybe spiritual happening. I think is because they understand that none of those things can be real,
Right.
And they can still maintain that way of thinking. The
Right.
best they can do is be an agnostic, and agnosticism, like I said, I think is self-defeating. Eventually, you end up having to find a way. You can't just remain not sure. You need to discover what's going on. If you say anything's going on,
Right. And then, to me, what is always a thing is that atheism creates a absolute of saying absolutely there's no God. So then what we have is only burden of one thing. That's the burden that we have, is to prove one thing that is supernatural above all.
Yeah.
In order to prove that and their claim is discredited. And that's where you get into a very sticky situation, is when you say there's absolutely nothing outside of the naturalistic world, and then you get a list of things, and it doesn't mean all of them have to be correct. Most of them aren't in their eyes, but you only have to get one. Yeah. One is the only answer, and that's where I think they find themselves in that corner that they pasted themselves at.
Yeah.
And I'm actually not really sympathetic to it, because in the sense that the maliciousness of atheism itself is saying absolutely nothing can be outside of this. And I think that's, as a Christian, obviously, I have a bias towards, I'm saying that, that is almost cutting half of the things that you experience out of the supernatural being, because we all have experiences of things that we can't even fathom what happened,
right.
And we have to wrestle with it in itself.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll give a little teaser. I want to do another video on this, but I do believe that you can pretty well construct a lot of the Christian worldview from the ground up. Mm-hmm. So with this being the ground, the ground being that something came from nothing, that there's a supernatural element to nature. Mm-hmm. And at that point, if you postulate something having created it, something having started it, you can start to look at the way things are, to look at the way things are, what the design intent was. And I think that that'll be a little bit of a teaser, but design thing always implies design intent.
Mm-hmm.
We're both engineers. I feel like we know that. And you can't help but evidence, I think, a good God out of that.
So, and just again, more personal for you, how has this changed in your walk? And obviously when we're speaking to the audience about our walk and that stuff, how has it changed your faith throughout your life with this answer?
Sure. I think a lot of times I would have kind of put myself as well as an atheist person on even footing to say that neither of us understand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's changed my faith to say that actually I do believe Christianity makes more sense
mm-hmm.
than atheism. Any kind of theism makes more sense than
right.
atheism. They're actually allowed to be cohesive. They're allowed to be coherent.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't think atheism solved that hurdles. And I know probably a lot of people will comment and discredit. I may take, if there's a good argument, I'll probably address it. But I mean, most of the time the arguments are going to be kind of some sort of shame, like
mm-hmm.
you don't understand science. But I mean, I know perfectly well that we've both been through the evolutionary biology, we've been through the physics classes, we've done it all. Read through the books, listened to Stephen Hawking lectures. I think at this point the arguments aren't there, and so the way that it's changed my faith has been, just that I feel like there's a confidence in knowing that, this is a very logical way of thinking,
mm-hmm.
and I love that. I love that I don't have to deny my intellect to be a Christian and
mm-hmm.
to go to worship and actually be fully invested in the church and those
mm-hmm.
around me. Doesn't mean that I just have to kill off my brain. In fact, it tends to make my faith, I feel like, more potent and more real to me.
Yeah. And like you said before, I think it is displayed throughout this channel, is that we're not trying to pose as authoritarians based on like our credentials themselves, because obviously we don't have the credentials of being a pastor or a sermon, but we always want to dive into the questions and logically think. The difference between a lot of our modern thinkers today is they don't rely on their credentials themselves to speak for their ideas. So that's why, in some essence, that we shouldn't rely on it. And I would ask the audience to do the same, to not rely on credentials themselves to improve points of ideas and contentions behind it, because in essence it's weak and it doesn't really talk to the heart of it at all. It doesn't talk to the idea itself and disprove it, except for the fact that we don't know what we're talking about, and that's it. And you know what? Some of it can be true, some of it can be false.
Yeah.
But other than that, do you have anything else you want to say, or?
No, I know we're running short on time here, but I would definitely say for two people out there, for the Christian, I would say take some confidence. There is, like we had said before, don't let these things fester. Don't let questions that you have kind of sit unanswered, because in actuality, the more you study, the more I find it faith-building. Mm-hmm. I've never felt so confident in my faith as when I was actually sitting in a class mm-hmm. at the secular university, hearing and studying these things, because then it was all the cards were laid on the table. I think it's the unknown that's the most scary, mm-hmm. and it doesn't. I think we're all right now we're all doing our best to understand life, and I think that for the Christian person, knowing that